Bugs crashing your pack's party? Whether they've got paws or sneakers, your pack deserves a home that's protected from pests. That's where Wondercide comes in. Plant-powered protection made with steam-distilled natural essential oils that actually work. It kills and repels fleas, ticks, mosquitoes, and ants without questionable ingredients or overpowering smells. Safe to use around kids and pets when used as directed. Lab-proven to work fast. And proudly made in the USA. We offer sprays for pets, people, homes, and yards. Plus, spot-on treatments, collars, and even shampoos. Whatever your pack needs, we've got it covered. Founded by a pet parent looking for a better way to protect her dog Luna, Wondercide's now protected over 21 million lives and counting. You might have even seen us on Shark Tank. Go to Wondercide.com and use code WONDER20 for 20% off your first order. That's WONDER20 at Wondercide.com. Wondercide. Protect your pack with plant-powered Wondercide today.
If you're looking for more horror outside of the mainstream, look no further than Unsung Horrors, a podcast about underseen horror movies. I'm Lance.
And I'm Erica. Every other week, we'll cover a horror movie with fewer than 1,000 views on Letterboxd. We'll even give you double feature recommendations to pair with the movies we discuss.
From gothic to shot on video, from slashers to comedies, from giallo to J-horror, we'll cover all the subgenres. So join us as we unearth these hidden gems of horror.
Follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, all at Unsung Horrors, available wherever you listen to podcasts. And part of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
The audio commentary. It's a dying art form, but here at One Track Mind, I, your wonky yet affable host Ryan Luis Rodriguez, analyze film through the prism of these embryonic forms of podcasting, one audio commentary at a time. Masterpieces, crapster pieces, live action, animation, cult classics, films literally no one has ever heard of. No track is too small, and no track is too big. Join me and my guests from the entertainment world as we keep these features alive every other Tuesday. Hey, who else is going to discuss Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey one week and Citizen Kane the next? Us, that's who. Sure, you have to put up with my voice, but there's a certain give and take in this industry. That's One Track Mind, part of the Someone's Favorite Productions family and available wherever you get your podcasts.
Weirding Way Media.
Hello and welcome to episode 135 of the Film Entries podcast. I'm Jamie Benning, your host, and this time I'm talking with cinema historian and friend of the podcast as well, Nigel Smith, who runs the brilliant website Memory Palaces and leads walking tours through London's forgotten picture houses. Nigel has spent years unearthing the stories of buildings that many of us walk past every day without realising that they once housed thousands of cinema goers. Could be a coffee shop, a church, a bingo hall, supermarket. All of them in another life were palaces of the movies. And what fascinates me about Nigel's work is the way he pieces together not only just the architecture and the dates when things happened, but the culture of cinema going itself. He digs into archives, old trade papers, and even community anecdotes to bring back the lived experience of going to the pictures, as we used to say here in the UK, or at least my parents' generation said that. In the 1930s through the 1950s, people went week in, week out, often with little care for what was showing. It was about the ritual, the social space, the scale of the event. And you compare that with today's selective and sometimes prohibitively expensive trips to the multiplex, and you start to see how much has shifted in a relatively short space of time. In our conversation, Nigel shares how he weaves these discoveries into his tours, from the grand Egyptian revival facade of the Carlton in Islington to smaller cinemas with stories of kids' clubs, eccentric managers and community football matches. We also talk about what's lost when these buildings disappear, how they often find strange afterlives, and why repertory and community cinemas might be the most hopeful path for the future of film going in London. It's a wide-ranging chat about architecture, memory, and the social life of cinema, but it's one I hope you enjoy. Now, as I said, Nigel is a friend. He's been on the podcast before, but he's got this new tour inside the old Carlton Cinema in Islington. And it turns out my mother-in-law was a patron of that very cinema. She lived in that area when she was a kid, and yeah, I haven't sent her the photos that I took while I was at the tour with Nigel yet, but I'm going to do that soon. And you're going to hear snippets from that tour, as well as my interview with Nigel. So I followed him around whilst he was doing the tour, mic'd him up. And I'm not going to give away the whole content of the tour, but just to give you a little bit of flavour in between the interview segments. So here's my chat with Nigel Smith, cinema historian, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on.
Morning, morning, morning. Hi, everybody. Well, first of all, it is absolutely lovely to see you all this morning for this tour. By my reckoning, I think this is the first time there's been an actual, ever, a sort of a proper tour of this building that is more than just sort of like showing people on open house and having a little look around, but is also trying to attempt to tell the story of the building as well. So this is like it's not quite as glamorous as a premiere, but this is like a premiere. And as you can see in front of you, you're standing in front of the former Carlton Cinema, opened in 1930 as a cinema, Grade 2 listed building. It's been a Grade 2 listed building since 1974. And now a church. So the reason I'm wearing this microphone is my friend Jamie Benning here has a brilliant podcast, and you're all film fans, I'm sure. Brilliant podcast called Filmumentaries, where he interviews a lot of people who've been involved in production of films. He's just back. He was on Martha's Vineyard, the location for the film Jaws, for the 50th anniversary weekend of Jaws, hanging out with Richard Dreyfuss and Joe Alves, a production designer who Jamie's making a documentary about. So hopefully Jamie's going to make a little bonus episode out of this tour, which is why I'm wearing the microphone.
Nigel, when you first started researching London cinema history, was there a particular building or a story that made you think, I have to share this with others?
I started getting into sort of like the cinema history and the walking tours was through Islington, because it was the area closest to where I lived, and the buildings that were the sort of the really nice surprises. In Islington, there are two coffee shops, Cafe Nero and a Starbucks, 10 minutes walk from each other, both of which used to be cinemas, which nobody would barely know. And that was definitely a hook. And then when you discover both of these cinemas opened before World War I, and they had this really, well, one of them had a very short history, one had a much longer history. So that was definitely a spark. And then when I got interested in doing walking tours, it's like the challenge is figuring out how do you make is there a story that's all within a nice walking distance between an hour and a half and 2 hours. But yeah, so the Starbucks on Upper Street and the Cafe Nero on Upper Street were the two sort of were definitely catalysts. But then, in that same area, you do have this building, the Carlton, with this incredible Egyptian facade.
Yeah.
That is so distinctive. You're like, brilliant. Okay, well, if we can incorporate that, and when I do the walking tour, that's the final stop. I'm always like, wow, let's save the best building till last. Opened in 1930. The architect is an architect called George Coles, one of the most prolific architects of cinemas in Britain. It's now a church, one of the biggest cinemas ever built in this country. I mean, one of the most bonkers buildings on Essex Road, but one of the most bonkers buildings in London, you know, I would argue.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible, that facade. I mean, it's you could expect that almost to be on Sunset Boulevard or something, you know, down the Hollywood Walk of Fame or something like that. It's that Egyptian design and very grand, and it's a completely different time for cinema goers, a time that existed before we were born. I mean, it closed before we were born, so this isn't particularly or necessarily a nostalgic trip for you. This is about something else. What is it about for you?
I think for me, the thing that I sort of discovered, although I already knew it, was the fact that the more old cinemas that I discovered in London, and specifically how many there were in close concentration to each other, you just realise that cinema going back in the 1940s and 50s, 1930s, it's a completely different game to what it is now. And something that I found myself sort of saying often when I was doing on the walking tours was this difference between today, if people go to the cinema at all, they're typically making a decision. I'm going to go and see that film. I'm going to go and see this new Superman movie. I'm going to go and see that film that I read or heard an interesting review of. Back when these cinemas were thriving, people just go week in, week out. And you have that phrase, oh, I'm just going to the pictures, indiscriminate of what was on. So there's an element, like I said, it's not nostalgic because this is not a period of time that I have any recollection of. In fact, you and I both grew up in an era which was literally the lowest time for cinema ever in this country. You know, 1985, fewest tickets sold ever in Britain. Yeah. That's when we were going to see like all these adventure movies and all this sort of stuff that we were into as kids. And so it's about kind of revealing that history and making people think a bit about that and that sort of history of movie going and how that's changed. And then just looking at these buildings and thinking, wow, they are relics and they're not that old. So, you know, you can do a tour of theatres in the West End. They're still theatres. You go do a tour of cinemas. They're not cinemas anymore. And a lot of them are listed buildings like the Carlton. So they sort of, what do you do with a building that was designed to entertain 2,500 people?
And one screen, like they were all one screen, weren't they? Those big palaces, movie palaces, yeah. 2,500 people. It doesn't, I mean, I don't think I've been in a cinema with that many people since probably 1983 when I saw Return of the Jedi at the Dominion. I mean, it just doesn't happen like that anymore. And I think you mentioned on the tour that average number of seats in screens today is tiny.
Yeah, I mean, the average I think is about 100 in a screen. Now, obviously, you've got more screens in each cinema, you know, but yeah, it's a totally different. I saw Superman the other week with 7 other people, I think, in a screen that only had the capacity for 30. If you'd have walked through those doors any Saturday night between like 1930 into the 1940s, you would have been in a throng of hundreds. The capacity of this, when it was a cinema, was 2,500. 2,500 seats. And like all of these old cinemas, one screen. So just by a little bit of comparison, if any of you are local, you might know the screen on the Green, about 10 minutes walk from here, 120 seats. The Curzon in Camden, where I go quite regularly because it's near where I live, 5 screens, 30 seats each.
These tours that I've been on a couple of your tours now, they always have a great mixture of storytelling and historical details. How do you go about piecing together these narratives from, you know, the archives and photos and local anecdotes as well?
The basis is, you've got to get the basics right. So what actually happened? When did the building open? If it has architectural significance, what is that? Crucially, when it closed, and especially if you're doing a walking tour, all of these things start to collide. Like, oh wow, this was happening in 1920 and that was happening in 1924. And so that's a way of sort of just bringing everything together. And and linking it. But in terms of the archival research, some of the best resources are just local newspapers. So I spent quite a bit of time in the Cinema Theatre Association archive, which is a wonderful place where they've got a lot of clippings. They have a file on every cinema that has ever existed in this country. Nice. It's incredible. And then the local history. So in Islington, go to the local archives, go through the microfilms, scrolling through, and I always look at the ads, because you used to have, maybe 2 pages just full of ads of what was on at all of the local cinemas. But you'll always come across little stories about, the kids' club football teams playing each other, Islington getting a 10-0 victory over, Hackney Odeon, and all of those sorts of things. And then there's another brilliant periodical, the trade paper, that's called the Kinematograph and Lantern Weekly. And you'll have heard me quote from this on the tours that you've been on. And that's a trade paper. And they had things like, the manager of a cinema back then was a really significant person. And they have like a column celebrating the managers or showmen that they would refer them to. So they'd always be doing stunts. And so you just get together these little bits of stories. And again, local history centres will often have some good oral histories of people whose memory. So on the tour in the Carlton, we talked about the kids' clubs. Some of that was just first-hand testimony that I'd read, which researchers had done. And then the great things about these archives is this is stuff that was, because even the 90s is old now, So even there was a great article that I found about when the Carlton Cinema was a bingo club, and it was just brilliant. It was so vivid about describing these self-described bingo addicts who were coming. So it's a mixture of that, and then just figuring out a story. I'm always very conscious that it would be very boring on the walking tours. We say, now here's a cinema that opened on this date, it closed on this date. So I'm always looking for sort of stories and narrative threads. And with this tour of the Carlton, it's an amazing story because you can see the building. So I really try to give a sense of like why it was built in this over-the-top Egyptian fashion, the context of movie going at that time. It was part of the ABC chain, so I was already aware of the ABC minors and the kids clubs, and then this story of decline. And so many of these old cinemas that opened in the 30s closed in the early 70s.
Yeah.
So 9 o'clock every Saturday morning, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of kids would come in here. It would cost 6pence. The real heyday for the kids clubs was the 1950s. The average pocket money back then was £1. So your 6pence, you'd pay your 6pence for the cinema, still have change for, your Kiora and your sweet. So imagine hundreds and hundreds of kids all doped up on lots of sugar, pent up excitement, and it would have been this amazing experience. They would have started by singing that song. The manager of the cinema would be on the stage, welcome them all. If it was somebody's birthday, you came in for free, and I suspect everybody sang happy birthday to them as well. But in terms of supervision, you've got the manager, maybe a few ushers, and then some senior, slightly more older children who would act as monitors. And that was it. Often they wouldn't let the kids into the circle because there was so much sort of the weapon that I have read most about, orange peel, seemed to be very, very popular for throwing at. There's some nods of recognition here.
Yeah, you sort of mentioned it there, but I sort of see your tours as, it's not just about cinema history, it's about the sort of London's broader cultural memory in a way, beyond places that just showed films. And I like how you always put things in a context, and there are some moments in your tour this time as well where there's there's a little bit of theatrics going on as well, which I really enjoyed. Is that something you like to introduce throughout these?
Yeah, so I go on quite a lot of walking tours, right, for inspiration. And there is an absolutely brilliant company called Minimum Labyrinth, I'm a huge fan of, and their tours are a mixture of almost, I always say, sort of guided tour meets street theatre, you know, so there's a little crew, there's but unexpected things happen.
Right.
And I've just recently been on their most recent tour all around Lambeth, and I've been on one of their things earlier. And what I love about it is this element of surprise. So and they do some stuff that is quite guerrilla, some of which I tried to ape. I do a tour in Acton, and one of the cinemas we talk about there, the Globe, was built in the 1920s, got huge, again, over 2,000 seats, got demolished in the late 50s. But I've got a really great poster for the opening night, which advertises the music hall artist that was, but what's there now is a shopping centre that was built 15 years ago. And a few times I've stuck that poster up in the shopping centre before the tour. Right. And I'm like, oh, look what we found here. And then the last 2 or 3 times I've done it, the security, it's only been half an hour and it's gone. So one of the reasons that really appealed to me about doing this tour in the Carlton Cinema, it is indoors and I'm 100% in control of the space. So little bits of, just to manage expectations, when we're saying theatrical, we're definitely, I'm not putting on any costumes. There's no, it's just me. But little bits of surprise, it was great. And figuring out how to do it and how to introduce it was really fun.
Yeah, it got a little round of applause, one of the members, when I was there. I think people sort of underestimate how much, you know, a building like this can tell us about sort of social life and habits in the community that surrounded it. And I think what was great about the tour that I went on with you was that there was a real eclectic mix of people there. There was a guy who'd been to that cinema and seen a film there, let's say pre-1972. There were people that had walked past it 100 times on their daily commute. There were people there like me who'd never really known about it. I think I've vaguely been aware of it as I've driven past. Probably it was a bingo hall, now a church, as you say in the tour. But I think it's just really important what you do, you know, in telling these stories, because they feed back into the press as well. Like you've had a nice article out today. So when people are researching in the future, you're doing them a favour as well by kind of gathering this information.
What is great is the tours evolve because of the participation of the people on them. So you've been on my tour in the West End. One of the best stops, Prince Charles Cinema. Yeah. And I start the stop now by asking pretty much, I mean, almost everybody's been there. Anybody got any good memories from Prince Charles? And they vary so much depending on the age of the people. There was somebody, you know, younger person just talking so fondly about some Adam Sandler film they'd seen there. And then there are other people talking about like all-nighters, and one guy memorably telling me about, he went there before it was the Prince Charles, and how his sister took him to see, I think, Emmanuel.
I think I was on that tour. I think I was on that very tour, yeah.
So all of these sort of feed in, and even at the Carlton, right? I've only done that tour 3 times now, the practice run and then 2 public tours, and somebody spotted something I had not seen already. Firstly, there was a great deal of interest in a bit of carpet that somebody spotted, and I was like, oh, that's a carpet from definitely the bingo era. But somebody else spotted the tip-up seat for the usherette.
Yes, yeah. And
obviously I did the tour. You came in the morning. I did it again in the afternoon.
So you integrated that?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
And it's a delight for people. And people notice things on the facades of buildings that I won't necessarily spot. So there's a wonderful cinema in the West End, the Plaza on Lower Regent Street. It's now a View. Half of it's a View, half of it's Tesco.
Yeah.
But it was opened by Paramount Pictures in the 1920s, and it's got the stars on the
still there.
Yeah, on this dome thing. I've done that tour dozens of times, and within the last 12 months, the guy's like, "Oh yeah, but if you look closely, there's also the mountain carved into the." Never spotted it myself.
Wow, yeah.
So all of these little things. So yeah, people's interactions really build it up.
Yeah. So you're sort of active history, isn't it?
Yeah. That's a very good question. Right, just been asked, I love this details that I've not even spotted. Just been asked about the carpet. There's a little carpet remnant here. And there's a bigger piece. Oh, a bigger piece of carpet. Let's take a picture. This, to me, exactly, this is bingo carpet. 100% bingo carpet. Mecca, that says Mecca bingo all over it. Very, very much the same colours. And again, if there's any sort of urban archaeologists among you, if you go around the back of the cinema, you'll still see the Mecca bingo car park sign. Very exciting.
What do you think, if we fail to preserve these stories, what do you think we risk losing, not just in terms of, the architecture, but in terms of, I guess, sort of local identity and local history as well?
It's a really good question. I mean, the one that is top of mind at the moment is the Odeon in Camden. Camden Town, Parkway, and it's a pretty bog standard Odeon, a little bit. It has not been luxed, like many of the other Odeons. There's a lovely Odeon Holloway Road near where I live, beautiful building, and now really beautifully restored. But Odeon announced a little while ago that they're just going to close that cinema, knock it down. Nobody seems to care less. But I do this tour in Camden, and when I talk about that tour, and particularly it had this really unique time period. I think actually I may have talked about this when we were last on the podcast, but it had this really unique period in the 80s when it was an independent cinema run by this very, very eccentric guy called Peter Walker. And it's like folk memory. And to some extent, when the building goes, people will stop. The trigger for the memory's gone as well. So as you get fewer cinema buildings, the memory of what cinema going was once like will go, even if it's being shared by people of my age who never even experienced it in that way. But I do also see the flip of these buildings were designed for another age. I've just been updating my website. I've got this website called Memory Palaces, which it's basically chronicling the stories of buildings that were cinemas but may not be anymore. And I've just uploading some more photos to it this week. And so many of these buildings that were built in this period are just not being used. And there's like, it was a nightclub for 10 years and now it's not a nightclub anymore, or a tiny bit of it is a snooker club. So that, and often these buildings are listed.
Yeah.
So what do you do with a listed building that's has no purpose anymore? I don't have an answer to that. Religious communities are answering a little bit because a lot of them are churches, but it's hard to find. Where are you going to find 2,500 people to come to the cinema?
Yeah, it's funny, that lifespan, isn't it? 2,500 people watching movies, then potentially a half-filled bingo hall, people praying to another god in a way, and now becoming churches as well. And thank goodness they are there, and they were. I mean, that one on your tour, you say that was bought by the church, the Carlton, and if it wasn't for them, who knows what would be left inside that building? Because there are parts of it, of course, that we saw that morning as kind of little urban explorers, that that some of it is quite derelict.
I've done quite a lot of archival research, and the most surprising discovery of of anything I've discovered about the Carlton was when I came across this advert. Your date for glamour. 1958. Next Wednesday, your dreams come true when a new luxurious salon opens in the Carlton Cinema. Elstree studio hairstylists will bring your very own beauty to new life. Whatever your type, there is a new hairstyle waiting for you. Jeanette Scott and John Fraser open the salon on Tuesday morning at 11:30. The appointment book is open. And if you note here, it says ABC Services. That is the ABC logo. So this is all a hair salon under the auspices of ABC. And I mentioned John Maxwell, who was the founder of ABC, owned Elstree Studios as well. So it's Elstree Studio Hairstylists. So it's the people who've been working at the studio right here in this room. You can't believe it, can you?
This is a final difficult question to answer. What do you think is the key to getting people to go to the cinema now? Because I think I said this to you last time. My local picture house closed in Bromley. I recently, I soon after that joined the Sid Cup Storyteller. I just got an email today saying that's also ending. It's going to be taken over by another chain potentially. Again, it was like a little multiplex, 5-6 screens. I wonder, is the key to the cinema's future having more of these repertory cinemas? You know, my daughter who's sitting next to me here, she's not listening, she's on headphones. She went and saw Devil Wears Prada last night in Peckham on a rooftop cinema. And it was pretty busy. They're all sat there with their headphones on and they're paying for comfy deck chairs and all that, making it a more experiential kind of thing. Do you think that's the key? Or what do you think is the key?
I think that has to be part of it. I think it's really cool, actually, in London that rep cinema seems to be thriving. The Prince Charles, the Garden Cinema, the BFI, and in the last few months, this bonkers cinema in Clerkenwell, the Nickel, has opened. I went there, within a few weeks of it opening, Tuesday night, saw a Lee Van Cleef spaghetti western. It's got 37 seats. Wonderfully, they used to be at the Odeon Shaftesbury Avenue, which closed not too long ago. And they show a different film every night. They're not even showing, that was your one chance to see Lee Van Cleef that week. I'm sure there's another Lee Van Cleef film. He made plenty of spaghetti westerns. But what was great there is Dom, the guy whose passion project it is, who's got it off the ground, who meets you when you go in. You go next door, which is where the auditorium is, and gave a really great introduction to the movie that was very personal. And it felt unique. And then it's got a little bar area downstairs, had a nice chat with some other folks who had been at, I went on my own, had a nice chat with them. And it was the whole experience. I really enjoyed watching the film, but I really enjoyed Dom's introduction. I really enjoyed chatting with a can of lager afterwards. And I think that sort of thing is got to be part of it. So somebody who actually works in cinema said to me recently, when we were sort of having this conversation, he said, I think every film will have an introduction.
Yeah.
In the future. And it makes it personal. It's something you don't get at home. I also think the prices have got to change. It's just not, I talk a lot about on the tours, the 1930s and 40s, how cinema going, it was an affordable luxury for people. A luxury because these buildings are so spectacular. It's not, very few cinemas are affordable. I paid £25 recently for a matinee ticket at an Odeon. The ticket booth where you'd buy your ticket, your individual ticket, was here. The pay box, so you'd have come through, little ticket, one of these little paper tickets, a bit like these. You'll have all seen these, because I normally give them away at the beginning of the tours. But one of those little tickets, these booths on the side, those are essentially the overflow. On busy nights, you might sell tickets here, but you basically have a pay box here. They weren't snack bars. If you wanted a snack, the usherette would come with a little tray in front of you and serve you in your seat. Prices. So the cheap seats were downstairs. So the stalls, £6. The expensive seats, and you're going to get a view from the expensive seats towards the end of the tour, 2 shillings. So quadruple the price of the cheap seats. So I'm not very good on pre-decimalisation currency, but if I think I'm right, 20 shillings to a pound, yeah? So 20 shillings to a pound, average wage, this is a very working class area at the time, average wage is 1930s into the 40s, £3 to £4 a week. So going to cinema was a very affordable luxury. Your £6 would get you a loaf of bread, maybe a couple of pints of beer, a shilling, a big plate of fish and chips. So those are sort of the price comparators. And again, so it was an affordable luxury for people.
Yeah, I think on Kermode and Mayo's podcast recently, they were talking about Family of Four costing the best part of 90 quid to go. And it wasn't even on like a big screen. It was a local multiplex. Because because kids' tickets no longer exist. You pay an adult price or the same price for everyone. Yeah.
So if it's not affordable, I think if it's not an experience, but I think an experience that is, I think the important thing for me, and I would say this, is like the experience should be about the experience of watching a film, not eating a pizza.
Yes.
You know, there is an element of the film is sort of like an adjunct to your sort of night out where you're going to get a meal and a cocktail and all of that stuff. And nice, you know, like I like to have a beer while I'm watching a film, great. But I want the focus to be the movie, which is why I think like having somebody passionate about the film, introducing, or what's the equivalent of, I don't know if this is even interesting or feasible, but you know, what's the DVD extra that you can get a little bit of when you go to the cinema that's different from home?
Yeah. Just as a reminder, where can people find your website? You find your tours?
So my website is called Memory Palaces, memorypalaces.co.uk, and I'm on Instagram at Nigel Smith Walks. So all of those places have got plenty around where the walking tours are about cinemas. And if you go to the website, you can have a really good delve through almost 100 buildings. There's about 1,000 photographs of cinemas and former cinemas in London to enjoy.
Well, thank you, Nigel, once again for being on the podcast, and thanks for doing what you do. Keep doing it because it's great, and I'll be certainly on more tours as they come, and bringing friends along to tours that I've already been to, including my wife, who really needs to come on one of those.
Great. I would like that very much. So I hope you've all enjoyed it. Rare chance to have a sort of explore of this building, and hope to see you again for another tour at some point in the future. Thank you all.
Thank you. That was my conversation with Nigel Smith there. You can find his tours and extensive archive, as he said, at memorypalaces.co.uk and on Instagram at Nigel Smith Walks. As always, thank you for listening. If you've been enjoying my episodes lately, conversations with people from film history and people who are keeping that film history alive, please think about supporting the show at Patreon, patreon.com/Jamie Benning. And even a small monthly pledge helps me keep the podcast going, covers the costs, and gives me time to dedicate the time required to dedicate to bring these stories to you. And if you're already a patron, thank you so much. You are the people helping make this possible. Don't forget also to check out the YouTube channel, Filmumentries, for video material, clips from my interviews, sometimes whole interviews in video form. And I'll be back with some more behind-the-scenes conversations next month. Until then, thanks for listening, and I hope you can join me for the next episode of the Filmumentries podcast.
Weirding Way Media.
Hello, this is Aaron West. I am the author of the A24 New Wave. In this book, I look at A24's output and I make the argument that we are in a new wave movement right now. A24 plays a major role. This book has a supplemental podcast where each episode is a brief conversation about an A24 related topic, whether an actor, director, or even a genre. As I continue research for the book and conduct interviews, I expect to record podcast episodes with people involved with the company. You can find the podcast at cinejourneys.com or wherever you find podcasts. and we are proud to be members of the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.